Hey everybody, BlendMaster here with another tutorial, and today I'm going to show you guys how to create this realistic cloud animation inside of Blender. This isn't very hard to do, and we're actually going to create the animation by inserting keyframes in the material settings instead of actually animating any 3D objects. So let's jump into Blender and get started. So what we have here is the final cloud scene, which we created in a previous tutorial, and if you want to learn how to recreate the scene, I'll put a link to the tutorial in the description below. So the first thing we want to do is open up a new window here, and I'm going to switch it from the 3D view to the node editor so that we can work with the materials of these clouds. I'm going to select the plane which has our big cloud texture, and before we start animating anything, I actually want to adjust the material slightly because I think that there's a little bit too much detail inside of these clouds, which makes it look a little fake. So we want to come over to this noise texture, which controls the overall shape of our cloud, and I want to decrease the detail from 16 to 1, and I feel like that makes it look a lot smoother. But this is up to your own opinion. You can do whatever you want to make it look how you want. So now we're going to come over to these two mapping nodes here, which are going to help us when we try to animate our clouds here. So this first mapping node affects only the shape of our overall cloud, while this second mapping node affects only the color and the outside distortion of the cloud. So if we were to play around with this X location for our first mapping node, you can see that our cloud moves along the X-axis as expected as we increase this value. But if you take a close look at the actual coloring texture, as we move along, the coloring stays the same in the global space as the cloud moves over it, which makes this look really bad. And to fix that, what we need to do is actually adjust the X location for the second mapping node. And as we increase this, you can see that it's moving to the left instead of the right, and that's because our first mapping node has the Z rotation set to 180. So if you want both of the mapping nodes' location to go in the same direction, you want to make sure all the rotations are set to the same. So if we just set the Z rotation to 180, now if we increase the X location, the coloring actually moves to the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our first frame here, and I'm going to insert a keyframe for both of these mapping nodes set to 1, or set to 0, and then I'm going to go to the last frame, which is 250, and set the X location to about 1.5 for both of the mapping nodes again, and just hover over it and press I to insert a keyframe again. And now if we scroll through our timeline here to take a look at our animation, you can see the effect we're getting. So now the actual coloring of our cloud and the shape are moving together perfectly along the horizontal axis, but the only issue with this is that the cloud doesn't distort as it moves along. It holds the exact same shape, and that's because both of these mapping nodes are set to the exact same value. So if we actually want some distortion as the cloud moves across the horizontal axis, we want our overall cloud shape to move at a slightly slower rate than this distortion mapping node. So instead of setting this to 1.5, I'm going to set it to about half that, which is 0.75, and then I'm going to press I again to just insert that new keyframe. And if we scroll along this timeline again, you can see that as our cloud moves, there's some distortion along the edges now as well, which makes it look a lot better. And so you can see that we easily just animated this along the X-axis, but I want to add some animation to the Y-axis. So we're going to do the same thing now. We're going to go to the last frame here, and if we increase the Y value positively, it goes downwards, but I actually want it to go upward. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have to go to the negative value. I'm going to set this to about negative 0.5 or negative 0.75. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And we're going to have to make sure that we insert that keyframe again. And actually I forgot, since if we play through this again, if you look in the Y direction, the distortion and the cloud shape remains the exact same, just like we had before. So we actually have to divide this by 2 again, so that we can get the nice distortion as our cloud moves. Otherwise it would stay the same. So I think that looks pretty good. The only issue though is if we were to render out a quick sample of this. Let me pause the recording and come back when it's done rendering. Now that it's done rendering, let's take a quick look at this. And if we watch this, you can see that it starts off very slow and then speeds up, and towards the end it slows down again. And that's because of the interpolation of the keyframes that we added. So to fix that, what we need to do, switch this back to a node editor, and we're going to open up a new window here and switch it to the graph editor. And I'm going to select this first mapping node here, and then inside the graph editor I'm going to press A so that we can select all of the handles here, and press V and switch the handle type to vector. And this essentially creates a straight line so that our animation is constant and doesn't have any speeding up or slowing down at the end. We also have to make sure that we do this for the second mapping node as well, otherwise we'll have issues with the distortion speeding up and slowing down. So that's good. Now all we have to do is do the exact same thing for our background clouds here. So I'm going to go to the first frame and just insert a keyframe here for both of these locations. And now we'll go to the last frame, and if we adjust this X value in the positive direction, you'll see that it's going to the left, and that's because this plane actually doesn't have any rotation. So for the X we want it to go to negative 0.75, and the Y we want it to go to positive 0.35. So this is basically just the opposite sign of our big plane texture. And so we'll insert a keyframe for that. And then for here we'll make it negative 1.5 and then positive 0.75, just like that. And we want to make sure that with this selected we're going to switch the handle type to vector for both of these again. And that should be it for creating the animation. So now I'll just unhide this plane here, and I'm going to render this out at 100%, and I'll come back when the animation is done rendering. So one thing I actually forgot to do is you want to make sure you switch this from PNG to movie file type. I'm going to open up the encoding here and make sure it's set to AVI. And then you just want to find your folder to save it. And I'm just going to name it cloud animation.avi. And now we can render this out again. So I'll pause the recording one more time and come back when I'm done. Alright, so it's done rendering, so let's take a quick look at this animation here. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial, guys. As you can see, we now have our cloud moving across our screen, and we're also getting that sort of dissolving effect at the edges of these clouds, which is exactly what we want. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. If you have any suggestions for future tutorials, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.